Welcome back, y'all. This is the Daily Destroyer DFS show, Dynasty Warzone Network. He is Lou. I'm Tyler. We'll be chatting about the Week 7 main slate on DraftKings, mainly talking cash games, as we always do, starting at the quarterback position. I think what makes this really interesting this week, Lou, is I think almost every single week so far this season I've played either Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. I think maybe one week I didn't, but majority of weeks have always been either Hurts or Allen. We just feel really good about the floor. The ceiling exists. We get neither one of those quarterbacks on this slate. So it kind of opened things up a little bit. It's not as straightforward. I think if you listened last week, it was basically like, oh, we're playing Josh Allen next, right? But I think there's a lot more conversation, a lot more ways to go at the quarterback position this week.
Yeah, I think without those two, without like Kyler's not on the slate either, you also just it's pretty much Lamar and everyone else. So there's two ways that you can play it. Either you just play Lamar and say he's just clearly a better point per dollar even player because his raw projections, depending on where you look, like you could argue that he's 3 points better than any other quarterback on this slate just because of his rushing upside. And there's not really many other QBs that have that. Herbert's upside hasn't really been hit much this year. Burrow, until last week, he hadn't really done much with it. So the guys that are necessarily going to match Lamar's ceiling aren't on this slate. So you could make the argument, just jam Lamar in. But at the same time, maybe you just take this opportunity to say, okay, maybe I'll lose a few points at QB this week, but this is my opportunity to pay down. You could go down under 6K. There's a few decent options there, and you're just saving the $2,000 that you can then spread it to some of the other plays at these other positions like wide receiver.
I think the most obvious one when we talk about savings here at quarterback, that's got to be Geno Smith coming in at 5,600. There was a bit of a disappointment last week with only 12 points, but we're looking at the 3 weeks before that, 24, 34, and 22. He's getting a little bit of rushing in there. We've seen him go for 48 yards and 49 yards 2 of the last 3 weeks. And obviously know that the Seahawks offense is clicking for whatever reason, but it certainly is clicking. So I think when we talk about paying down at that quarterback position, Geno Smith's one of the first guys we are looking at. How do you feel about Geno?
Yeah, I think Gina is probably my favorite of the plays. He's in the game, the only game on the slate that's over a 50-point total against the Chargers. We've seen the Chargers outside of last week when they played a tough Broncos defense. Pretty much all the Chargers games have been close to shootouts. They all generally have a lot of scoring and a lot of fantasy goodness in them. And we've seen that happen with the Seahawks as well. Up until last week, it was pretty much if you want to play any of your fantasy guys, look for the Seattle game, look for the Detroit game, and just jam them in there. This might have been the floor game last week for Geno all season. I think he could bounce back from that. We also know he has a little bit of a rushing floor, not as good as Lamar's, but on a slate like this, if he gets you 25, 30 rushing yards, that might be one of the top rushing outside of Lamar on quarterback for this slate. But I think you can also expect him to get a good amount through the air. He has great options to stack with this week, bring back options as well in that game. So I really like Geno, I think, the most.
And another guy that I at least want to bring up here is going to be Joe Burrow at 6,900. My thought here is like obviously we'll get to it, but I think Mixon is a good play this week. I think he's probably going to be in that pool. But if you don't end up going with Mixon, Joe Burrow at that 6,900 price could be something to consider.
Yeah, it's one of those slates where there's going to be somewhat clear plays at running back that you can very easily in tournaments play the passing attack from. One of those is Cincinnati. A lot of people want to go back to the Burrow stack this week. They saw what Jamar Chase did last week. Obviously, Higgins, Boyd. There's a lot of good guys that you can stack Burrow with. On the flip side of that, Mixon has had great usage this year. He's part of the passing attack. generally his floor is 18 to 22 touches, which you like to see that when you're picking someone on fantasy. If a lot of people are going to Burrow, it's just okay. Maybe Mixon gets some touchdowns instead. Plus matchup against the Falcons, where we expect Bengals to be leading. That's the type of game I like to play Mixon on. I like to play Burrow more in games where I potentially expect them to be coming from behind. But this game does have a decent total on this slate, 47. So I think a lot of people are going to go there. I do like Mixon pretty good amount this week.
And then let's just talk real quick about a couple other pretty cheap quarterbacks I think people are considering, just to get your thoughts on which direction you might go. Daniel Jones, 5,100. Derek Carr at 5,900. And let's just throw in Jimmy Garoppolo at that 5,500 price. I think people might be sleeping a little bit too much on this Kansas City San Francisco game. One, Vegas is implying 49 points, which is pretty high for the slate. And two, San Francisco's defense is quite banged up at this point in time. And I'm uncertain that they are the defense they were in the first, couple weeks of the season. So out of these kind of cheaper guys, these sub 6K guys, Daniel Jones, Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, is there any interest that you have?
Not much. I think probably Carr I'm most interested in just because of, we'll come to it at running back, but Josh Jacobs is probably the most owned player on the entire slate. So if you play Carr, you're getting direct leverage off of that. I think the Carr Adams stacks are pretty juicy this week, a game that we expect to score a lot of points. Facing Houston, we know how bad Houston is in general, and this game could be a shootout. Carr, once again, as mentioned before, he doesn't have to match a Hurts this week. He doesn't have to get you 35 points. He could get you 25 and probably still be solid for that price, 5,900. So I think he's probably my favorite of that group. Not too interested in Daniel Jones, just the way that the Giants are running their offense. I think his upside is rather limited comparatively. Garoppolo is interesting. He's pretty cheap, and that game environment, I think people are somewhat forgetting about it, but that one could be a juicy one to go to just because we're expecting a lot of points in that game. It's going to have to come from somewhere. So I think Jimmy's an interesting take.
Pool of three quarterbacks, Lou.
I think my pool of three, it's tough to not say Lamar. I'm kind of between Lamar and Herbert at the top end. I think I prefer Herbert for stacking purposes. I think he'll still be pretty owned, but uh, let's just say Herbert for now, and then Gino and Carr.
Cool. Sounds good. Running backs position, I think we hinted at it. I think in our cash lineups, Josh Jacobs, 6,500. He's just finding his way in there. He's one of the first players that were clicking everybody. So, I think it's just pretty obvious. The price is too good for the role that he's been having in this offense, in this matchup, with the implied total being the favorite. So, yes, Josh Jacobs is what we are kind of building our lineup around. But let's move on from there a little bit, I think, because, we talked a little bit about Mixon and having interest in Mixon. Let's just talk about some of these top end guys to kind of get, your thoughts on these guys and if you want to play any of them. I'll pick an arbitrary spot and we'll just talk about Mixon, but Mixon at the bottom. But we got Mixon. I don't think Aaron Jones is in play, but
Mixing up.
Mixing up. Yeah. So like Mixon, Fournette, the Barkleys, Chubb, JT. Henry, Eckler. Obviously not CMC because of the trade, but we got a lot of big dog running backs on the slate. Are you paying? I guess the question is, we talked about Mixon. So before we jump into Mixon, are you going any higher than Mixon? Any interest higher than that 7K slot?
I think they're all super interesting. I have some concerns with Fournette because that game could get not necessarily out of hand, but the Bucks should just smash the Panthers, especially now without CMC there. But in that sort of game script, maybe they sit Lenny a little bit for Rashad White. So that has me some concern for paying that 7,700 for a running back who might only play a half or something. So that's my concern there. I think all these guys are pretty good. Nick Chubb, probably not a Nick Chubb week.
Fair.
I'm probably not going to play much of that Baltimore-Cleveland game. So Derrick Henry, 4 straight games with a rushing touchdown. He's pretty much back. He has the last 100 yards, including he had 100 yards and a touchdown 2 games ago against this same team, the Colts. He's interesting just because I feel like a lot of people aren't going to go up, and if they do, they go to Eckler. Eckler's obviously in a great spot as well. All these guys kind of are. I don't know how many people are going to click Barkley's name. He's also in a good spot. So I think up here, Joe Mixon might end up being higher. Like Mixon and Eckler might be more highly owned. So I think that intrigues Barkley and Henry for me.
And then anything to add on the Joe Mixon side? I think you might have said it all, but now like we're officially on the running back positions because I think Josh Jacobs is one of our guys this week. It sounds like Mixon is as well. Anything to add there?
I think Mixon's the cheapest, and I think I want to get some savings, and I don't think he in his upside is all that different from Barkley in his game matchup. So as far as like cash goes, I think I'm gonna end up with Mixon. Honestly, I do think I'm gonna try to get there.
Mixon and Jacobs.
I do. All these guys are in good spots, so I kind of want one of the 7K plus running backs. And if I'm playing Geno, like it's almost the reason to pay up in one of my running back spots.
Mm-hmm.
So like we said, already gonna have Jacobs. Like he's the lock, but because his upside's exactly the same as all these other guys that we're talking about, but he's by far the cheapest. So maybe I just go Jacobs and Mixon and try to be different in wide receiver.
Fair enough. And then, let's talk about, paying down a little bit or going a little bit cheaper at running back. I think 2 names that stuck out to me almost immediately was Kenneth Walker. Didn't play him last week, but still had a great week. 5,800 in a matchup against the Chargers where, let's be frank, they haven't been great against the run all season. And there's, again, expect to be a lot of points in this one. And then Breece Hall, 6,200. For me, Breece Hall is a top 10 running back right now in the NFL. Big Breece Hall guy. Played him last week. Absolutely loved it. It is a tough matchup here against the Broncos, obviously. But a couple things are at play here that I think have got me some interest in Breece Hall outside of his affordable price in 6,200. I think, one, I look at the Denver defense. Yes, very stout, but they're much more stout against the pass. They've allowed, I think, one fun fact, I think the Broncos defense has allowed 1 passing touchdown in the last 5 weeks. So they're not letting anything happen through the air, but through the ground it is possible. We do expect the Jets to score Vegas at least expects the Jets to score 2 touchdowns in this game. I think, at least one of those could easily find its way to Breece Hall. And then the fact that Russell Wilson, although he hasn't been good, he is not playing, and Brett Ripon, or I'm sorry if I pronounce his name incorrectly. I don't even know who he is. He could be. He is starting. Yeah, he is starting this week. So that which makes me think there is a world maybe when the Jets do kind of come out with a little bit of a lead, albeit a small lead, but they elect to run the football. So Breece Hall 6,200, Kenneth Walker 58. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I prefer Breece. That game is going to be so gross now. It's like it's dropped 6 points once Russ was deemed out.
37 point play total.
Yeah, so we'll come to it at defense, but everyone wants the Jets defense this week for those reasons. Breece goes well with that. He's looked great. Like between him and Dameon Pierce, like we got some good rookie running backs this year. I just think Breece, to me, we've seen it multiple weeks for him. We still aren't completely sure on Ken Walker. That game environment's great. We already like Geno, so I think part of that too is you could take Geno and Kenneth Walker and say, oh, I have all of the scoring from the Seahawks, and be good. So I do understand those bills as well, but I prefer Breece. I played him last week. Been playing him the last few weeks, and it hasn't let me down yet. I think Kenneth Walker, he could let some people down last week, but yeah, to me, I think for 400 difference, I'm going with Breece.
I love it, man. I want to ask for a pool of 5 running backs because obviously one of them is Jacob, so it's kind of actually asking for 4 running backs here. And if there's one that we have not talked about, let's touch on it real quick.
Yeah, Jacobs, Breece, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, And then Damian Pierce is interesting. I think he's too expensive though. So I'll go with the cheap guy. What do you think about EDN? I think
I like him. I'm
he's
glad you mentioned him.
okay
I'm
in
glad you
tournaments.
mentioned
Like
him.
he's got somewhat of a decent floor. He's getting more action more recently. It somewhat depends on the game flow, but I think against the Giants, they might be shutting down the wide receivers, so it might lead to more opportunities
I like it.
for
I like
ETN.
Etienne this week. Yeah, I think
So
he's a short. I think he's a short play.
5,400. I think if I'm going cheaper, he's a guy I'm looking at. Uh, only 400 different from Walker, so I don't know if I would do it in cash, but I think more so that's a tournament play anyway.
Wide receivers. Interesting week, I think, because there's just a lot of guys here at the top that I believe aren't going to get a lot of run or a lot of play. People just aren't going to be that interested in. So let's just start there. Let's look at. It's a rough week, but let's call it the Michael Pittman and up. So Michael Pittman, Debo Samuel, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams. We're paying up. Let's throw in Mike Williams there too, just for the sake of 7,200. If we're paying 7,200 or more at wide receiver this week, any of these guys finding their way in that lineup for you?
I think it's kind of tough at wide receiver this week. A lot of these guys in like the 6K range are great.
Which we'll get to. Yeah, we'll get to.
I really like Adams this week. I think
with Jacobs or without
him.
Without Jacobs.
Could be both. I think it's going to be concentrated this week. I don't know if you need to like paying up that much in cash. You don't really need to do it. So it's probably more of a tournament play. But I think Michael Pittman's okay because of matchup. Probably don't go there. I think I would prefer maybe Amon-Ra since they have a lot more injuries on the wide receivers there. So that one's good for me. I think CD is probably like the lock for me. He's the safest, I think, at 6,800, especially with Dak back. Even when it was Rush, like, yeah, he's just the guy there. So my favorite this week is CD, but I think it's like CD, Amon-Ra, then Mike Williams. I don't think you need to really go more expensive than those guys, though.
Yeah, I'm with you on that because you look at the volume that CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra both get, and they're priced at 7,100 and 68 respectively, but the volume they get is no different than the dudes we just named ahead of them. Like, truly. They're looking, these are like some 30% target share guys, and that's precisely what some of those guys ahead of them are. So I think it's really easy to get CeeDee Lamb and to get Amon-Ra, especially because of what we're doing at quarterback, likely with Geno. And then again, at running back, where we're not paying up there either. It's just easy to jam in a lot of the low 7K guys as well. Similar range, maybe dropping down a little bit. Two guys that I think I have interest in, again, are going to be Brandon Cooks at 6K. It's just a really juicy matchup with the Raiders. I think he's in for a decent bounce back game. And then T. Higgins at 64. I mean, it's one of those times when we, I've talked about this before on the show, but Jamar Chase is 8,200 and T. Higgins is 6,400. Like they're when they're both on the field, in my opinion, they're pretty even. Like they're pretty much split to see who's going to blow up that game, and to see that much of a gap in their pricing probably is factoring in a little bit of that ankle injury for T. Higgins, but everything seems like it's good to go. So. For T. Higgins to be that much cheaper than Jamar really sticks out to me. So T. Higgins 64, Cooks 6K. Your thoughts, Lou?
Yeah, the reason why I don't necessarily think you need to Chase is a great matchup this week, but you can just take an 1,800 discount and play Higgins, who has similar upside and probably similar floor. If Burrow's going to go off this week, like it's going to be one or the other probably of these two guys. So I really like Higgins. I think he's pretty safe bet in that spot. Cooks, man, I don't know. He just doesn't have a ton of upside compared to some of these other guys. Like I would prefer Metcalf and even Lockett for 200 cheaper. They also go with the Geno thesis. So mostly I don't know if I'll play Cooks. I think he'll be somewhat popular. He is safe. He is have a pretty narrow window of what his scoring is going to be. So I think he's fine. I also like Godwin though too, probably more than Cooks. What do you think about Godwin? Because we've been playing him the last few weeks.
I
His
like
price
him.
hasn't gone up to 7K yet. It's still a
Yeah,
pretty good price,
I
and
think
he's getting a ton
objectively,
of
yeah,
work.
I think objectively he's a good play. He's definitely a guy that I'd be considering for the pool.
Game flow.
It's a game flow. I think we and I kind of like hinted at this off the show where it's like the Panthers are such a dumpster fire right now that like game could be put away at halftime and like they're running out like Rashad White and like Scotty Miller or whoever else is like the backups just because it's
Scotty
like
Miller.
it's just out of like why do they need to throw to Godwin? Like perhaps they get there because Godwin's got 80 yards and touchdown or a couple touchdowns or something. And I think Godwin's a good play, but I think the narrative that I'm building for myself for the Bucks this week is they just go in there and they tear it up real quick. The game is put away, and they just don't need to be playing their Fournettes or their Godwins or their Evans very heavily in the second half.
Yeah, I agree there. I think you can make the case though that if they get to the point where they're playing backups, then they probably already had 3 or 4 touchdowns. And in that event, Godwin probably has one of them,
That's fair. Yeah, no, that's fair.
So that's like the case for still doing it at his price of 6,300. I think it's you're kind of pivoting off of playing the guys who are like Metcalf, Higgins, and Lockett, who might be more highly owned. Mm-hmm. So it's somewhat of a pivot off of them to play the Godwin. But we say this in some other sports, like basketball's a big one, where it's like just time on the court is huge for projecting points. And I think the likelihood of Bucks players to not play a whole game is just so much higher than other teams this week. So I agree with you there. So I think in this range, probably who you think it's like, okay, I'll give you 3: Higgins, Lockett, and Cooks. Rank those 3 because I don't think you can play all 3. You probably can.
I'd probably go Higgins, Lockett, Cooks, just like you said it.
Higgins, then Lockett, then Cooks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Lockett had a down week, but I mean, I'm still betting on the Seattle offense.
I would also say like Lockett's been somewhat questionable this week. If he were to be out, then I think I put Metcalf above the other 2.
That's fair.
That target tree is just so tight, and if you take out one piece of it, like Metcalf's going to get 40% of the targets this week in that case, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. Any other wide receivers you want to chat about before we go to the pools? There are a couple cheaper ones option, the punts or something?
There's not many cheap plays at wide receiver. I think the way you get cheap is going to end up being tight end. Not a ton of sub 5K wide receivers that are all that sexy this week. For me, I'm looking at Alec Pierce, 4,600, good matchup. Matt Ryan's just been throwing the ball a ton. We've seen him throw for tons of yards too. And in a few of these games, he's getting over 300 yards. He likes Pierce. Pierce has been getting a lot more work. He's relatively decent floor as of late. I kind of like him. I think Wandale might get some traction as well.
Wandale, let's go. I like him, man. I like him. Big fan.
Garrett Wilson's kind of interesting with the whole Elijah Moore situation. Noah Brown, play all your guys against the Lions.
And then
no one's really sticking out though.
Yeah, I mean Josh Reynolds. I think I would put in that same kind of grouping that we were just talking about. Chark has been ruled out.
Yeah.
You look at Josh Reynolds like the last couple of weeks when he played. His targets are 6, 7, 6. He's eclipsed 80 yards. His targets have been, that was his receptions were 6, 7, 6. His targets were 10, 8, 10, and he's gotten over 80 yards for the last 3. So I look at the guy that's like, he's been pretty locked in for 15 points a game at 4,700. You're 3Xing with Josh Reynolds. And so, yeah, he's in that category too. Nothing's really sticking out to me there. I don't really think I need to go that low at wide receiver, just the way things are kind of building out. But there are some names I'm comfortable with.
If you just want like a piece of that game, he's a cheap way to be part of Patrick Mahomes' situation, which is always enticing to do. So if you're going cheap, they're all kind of dart throws. Not super confident in any of them. I think in a cash build, I would be most confident with Pierce. I just think he might have the best of the floors, but upside, they all pretty similar. Like match him with your wide receiver or a game that you're already playing connected to. If it's a Jimmy G lineup, you play MVS in it kind of thing. So that's sort of been how I've been looking at the lower range. And also because it's not all that good under 5K, that just leads me more to that play Geno
Fair.
over Lamar this week.
Pool of 5 wide receivers, Lou.
Yeah, I think I'll go with CD, Amon-Ra, Metcalf, Higgins, and I'll take Alec Pierce as my 5th.
Okay. Over to tight end. I think this is a pretty clear punt week, at least for me, just because of some injury and the pricing of the way things are going. Yeah. Brings me to Foster Moreau, 2,800 with Waller declared out, and Cade Otton, 2,700 with Brait declared out. Thoughts on these two punts?
Yeah, I think Foster Moreau I prefer because with the Bucks, you have Godwin, you have Evans. They already take a good amount of the targets, and there hasn't been all that much action to the tight ends for Brady this year. Fournette gets a lot of work, a lot of passing work, but if we do believe in this idea that they get to a big lead in the first half, Cade Otton, maybe they want to see how he does. They play him out the full game. He might get some more opportunities for that reason. But we've seen Foster Moreau, Carr already, last 2 games, he's got 3 catches. Carr will throw to him. He's got a better floor, I think. But at the same time, like, everyone's going to be playing Jacobs. I don't know. I think that this is what leads me back to the Carr Adams thing. If everyone's going to Jacobs and Moreau, that's why Adams just looks like such a good GPP play to me.
No one's clicking him.
I think for me it's Foster. I think he's got a better floor. Cade's floor is like more legitimately 0. What do you think about Dulcich though? Because this is the hot name. He's been praised because they played on Monday night, got a touchdown for everyone to see. People on fancy Twitter were all about him, and just feel even more all about him now that he got that 1 touchdown. That was like the worst coverage I've probably seen in a few weeks. But what do you think about Dulcich? I mean, the hair, the mustache, like he's great out there.
I like the guy. He looks nice. He looks pretty explosive
like a ball
there
player.
for a point. Yeah, I mean, it looks like ball. I mean, 2,500, sure. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm just not as excited about Dulcich as other people. Like, he had a nice 37 or something yard touchdown, but it was completely blown coverage. I mean, he had a target right on the goal line, which was good to see. I'm not necessarily upset if anybody wants to play Dulcich. Like, if people want to go that route, I think it's completely fine. We're talking punts. He's cheaper than the 2 guys we talked about, but just not going that direction. Just not for me this week.
Yeah, I probably won't do it. I get it that people that will listen, like, people are just going to live in this range. I think this is where playing a Lamar Andrew stack in tournaments, you're gonna be so different. I kind of originally I thought, Carr, and you can play Adams and Moreau with it, but if Moreau ends up getting overly owned here, like, I kind of hope that people are gonna start being like, Otton better than Moreau, and then playing Moreau will get a little better. But
we'll see.
I don't think enough people are gonna play Dulcich, especially now that Russ is out. I think that changes things.
That's fair.
Like a less competent quarterback. Schultz is 3,600. I have some interest in him with Dak back.
That's fair.
Dak seems to be better with him.
The price is
still
good.
relatively cheap, so you're still saving. Yeah.
The price is
do you have any other, like, if you're going higher, like Noah Fant is 3,100. Great game environment. Has somewhat of a floor now. But if Lockett were to be out, I think I'd be a lot more interested in it.
Yeah, no, I'm just not. I'm good. Pool of 3 tight ends. Let's challenge you on one.
Yeah, Moreau. I don't really love playing Otton per se either, but and then Schultz and Andrews.
All right, fair enough.
This could be a double tight end week. What if you go
Kelsey, Andrews,
Otton and Moreau? You could fit a lot if you put those 2 and Geno in your lineup. You can play like everyone else that we've talked about.
You can play all the dudes. All the dudes can get in there. It's a good point, Lou. let's close things out. Defense, special teams. I think the Jets obviously are going to be probably the most popular of it all. I mean, 2,600 already a good price. They're already in play, but even if Russ was going to be starting, if we're going to be honest with ourselves here, but
Yeah.
now with Brett behind the center, I expect them to be pretty highly owned, especially in cash games. So are you just going to the Jets just to kind of like almost as a block because you have to, or are there
Yeah.
other places that you're going to look?
Jets are going to be at least like 20, I don't know, probably 20% owned. It might be higher now. Like they were already going to be owned.
Yep.
And now they're just going to be even more owned when the expected total drops 4 points from their opponent, I think there's not a ton of great cheap defenses this week to really pivot to. Falcons have been a solid defense sneakily this year. They are facing Burrow, who has thrown some picks this year. He gets sacked a decent amount. I think Falcons would be the pivot in tournaments. People will tell you that you should always pivot off of the Jets in the GPP just because of ownership.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Hard for me to say that per se. I don't know. I go back and forth. If you're playing like Brees with Jets together is probably how you do it in a tournament, but that might also be super owned. So I think the pivot is Falcons. And in that case, you're not playing any of the Bengals. Just make sure you know that also. And then from there, you can pay up. I think you could go the other side of that game with the Broncos. Like the Jets aren't all that great of an offense. 3,300. It's a low scoring game, as we've been mentioning. That could be interesting. Or like you just pay up for the Bucks, man. They're under 4K. I was surprised, but I mean they could just completely smack. They could shut out the Panthers.
Dude, it's a 13-point implied total for the Panthers. Like it's just ridiculous.
Yep. The Bucks are projected for 10 points as a defense, which not many defenses get projected at double digit.
I also have some mild interest. I think like since everyone's gonna be clicking Jets at 26, clicking Commanders at 25. Like we know how the Packers have been playing this year. Not that great, extremely slow, not scoring a ton, kind of a grindy game. I think it's not the worst idea to just like it's not about saving $100, but saving $100 and just clicking on the Commanders because. It's just so many people are going to have the Jets, man. It's like...
and in that same vein, you go to the Texans because almost all lineups, I think, are going to have at least one Raider, whether it's Moreau or Jacobs or even Carr. I just feel like so many people are going to have Raiders. Maybe you play opposite and you go Dameon Pierce with Texans. If that is a combo that's like winning tournaments, I would not be all that surprised this week.
No,
so, game flow.
It doesn't feel good, but you're not wrong.
Say Carr throws a pick six early on, and the Texans defense then just becomes optimal because they're in the lead and Pierce. So it's possible. There are some options down there, but I think you just kind of go Jets in cash, but GPP, very easy to get off of them.
Final thoughts, week 7, Lou.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways you can go this week with so many big teams off the slate. I mean, Bills, Eagles, Rams, Vikings, like those are 4 of the best and stackable offenses in the league. You don't have Kupp that's taking away at the wide receiver or Diggs. You don't have Allen. You don't have Hurts. Like a lot of these high-end fantasy players are off the slate. So there's a lot you can do, a lot of different ways to go about it. So it'll be a fun slate to build lineups this week.
All right, Lou, where can they find your Twitter? Where can they find your work?
Yeah, at Lucky_LouDog on Twitter. I work at Lucky Trader and do some work on DraftKings Rainmakers for them. So if you're interested in that product, we do a Twitter space on Thursdays where we go over some strategies for that as well.
All right, you can find me on Twitter at FFTylerO. That's all we have today, folks. Don't forget, tell somebody you love them. Later.